and welcome back to my channel. As you can see, the Vauxhall Nova has arrived. I want to show you the car, show you what I'm going to do to the car, but also want to run through the cost of the engine build so far. So this engine, in my opinion, is going to be the ultimate fast road engine for this Vauxhall Nova. So if you don't already know, it's a 2-litre 16-valve red top engine, what's had high compression pistons put in, steel con rods. It's had QED Gen V throttle bodies, these 45mm throttle bodies, high lift cams, and basically the works. Standalone management, it's had a rebuild, everything's pretty much new. So this is going to be fitted in that. It's going to make around 210 horsepower, hopefully. So the car, this is a low mileage, I think it's done 20,000 miles, glacier white, 1.2 injection Vauxhall Nova. Now, this is, I've been in the Nova game for a long time, and this is one of the cleanest ones I've ever seen. It has been resprayed, but to an incredibly high standard. From what I can gather, the car's had no welding whatsoever. All clean. It's clearly been looked after since new. And yeah, it's near enough perfect. So the owner of the car absolutely adores it. However, it's just not quick enough for him. He wants it to be faster. He wants it to be fun. And this 1.2 is never going to be either of them two things. As you can hopefully see, the bodywork is just absolutely fantastic. The paint's fantastic. There's no orange peel anywhere, even the really hard areas to paint, like for example around here. Stuff like that, difficult to get to, all really good. So whoever painted it has done a fantastic job. Take my hat off to them. The exterior is just as nice. There's no rust anywhere. If you look around the car, I can't see anything. As you can see down here in the wings, really, really clean. As perfect as you can get them, really. I'm not going to bother stitch welding the car, which may upset a few of you folk, but I know when I've been in around these cars long enough, I know it's going to be okay. It's going to be fine. I've known people run 300 horsepower for a long time in clean shells, never had an issue. I think a lot of people stitch weld cars because they've heard of bad stories, for example, the cross member ripping out, stuff like that. And from experience, that's generally because the engines are being thrown together in old cars, which are very rusty and not very well maintained, for example. So this is a really good car, and I know full well it's going to withstand the test of time. So yes, I'm not going to stitch weld it because I don't want to ruin such a clean engine bay. So yeah, the car is a little bit dirty because it has arrived on a trailer, but I mean, there's zero rust bubbles anywhere, nothing. Sills are original. I can't believe how clean it is. Such a good base for this project. It's going to be so nice. So what the owner wants to achieve basically with this car is to make it look like a JSI when it's done, or very similar anyway. So we're going to change the bumpers, JSI bumpers. They're going to be colour coded white. It's going to have GTE JSI side skirts, the black vinyl on the bottom of the tailgate, and obviously it's already got the boot spoiler. So the interior is going to be changed too. The minute it's got the standard 1.2 grey interior. It's obviously got a sportier JSI style steering wheel and the SRI clocks, I believe. But other than that, it's standard. Yeah, I don't know what Carl wants to do exactly, but he definitely wants to do something with it. So the shifter it's good for one of these, but it's still like steering soup. They were never great. So we're going to put a Cavalier internal shifter, and then the gear linkage under the bonnet, we're going to rose joint. We're probably also going to raise this slightly, so it's up here. It just makes a better gear change, like my SR. As you can see, it's already got the obligatory Speedline Alicio wheels. The tyres are 165, so I'm not sure if they're going to be up to the job. We might have to change them. And also the brakes behind them are the standard 1.2 brakes, so they're definitely going to be upgraded. And engine bay wise, we're going to fit a strut brace. We're also going to fit aluminium header tank, screen wash tank, and oil catch tank on this side, and they're going to be painted in the same kind of crackle paint as the rock cover on the C20XE engine. Exhaust wise, we've got this much bigger 4-2 into 1 manifold made by Ashley. It's not the prettiest manifold you've ever seen, but it's definitely function over form. It's definitely going to help this baby flow. And then I'm going to make a 2.5-inch system from this from scratch. So if this kind of stuff interests you and you want to see the full build as well as the full restoration on this SR in the next few months, maybe, please show your support by hitting the subscribe button and leaving a comment below. Right, next off, I'm going to tell you exactly how much this engine build has cost us so far. So the cost of the engine build so far, now bearing in mind this isn't my engine, I'm doing it for someone else. Some things could be done a lot cheaper, some things could probably cost more, but this is how much it's cost Carl so far. So start off with the engine. He bought a rebuilt C20XE engine with a F20 gearbox at £850. It turned out it wasn't as good as we'd hoped, but that's another story. The head gasket set, which is a good quality item, was £86.50. The sump baffle plate, which is a 2 litre 8 valve style one, that was £24. The crankshaft seals were £35. The QED kit, which is basically the ITBs, the ECU, the loom, the cams, the pulleys, pistons, all the bolts and fitting kits, etc., was £3,877.20. The steel connecting rods was £316.53. The water pump was £25.17. The cam belt kit was £205. The head bolts was £23.90. The engine oil was £15.89. The oil filter adapter to remove the standard sandwich plate was £15.70. The oil filter was £10.85. The oil catch tank was £138. The oil pump gasket was £14.58. The engine bearing kit was £60. The clutch, which is a standard LUK clutch, was £159.10. The billet steel lightweight flywheel was £287. The performance HT leads were £37.50. The coil pack mount was £30. Paint and consumables was around £60. The fuel pump was £39.90. The injector testing was £62, so that's to check and test the injectors to make sure they're okay. The full silicone hose kit was £376.06. The billet aluminium radiator was £229. The header tank was £145. The Y-piece hose blank was £3.94. The servo hose kit was £27. Fuel hose was £10. The gearbox spacer kit was £25. The brand new built-up drive shafts with new CV joints were £365. The Harry Hockley converted hubs were £372.58. The Ashley exhaust manifold was £225, and then the assorted Ashley 2.5-inch exhaust bends and boxes, etc., was £200. So that's a complete total of £8,352.40, which is a lot of money. However, this is a fantastic car, and these are only going up in value. So I think it's money well spent, in my opinion. This is going to be one of the nicest Novas on the road, full stop, hands down, no ifs, buts or maybes. It's a stunning car, and it's going to be even more stunning. This is the engine, well, I say Vauxhall should have put in. They would have never done that, but they should have done something more like this from factory, because it's such a common conversion and absolutely makes these cars. So this is 45 horsepower standard. QED reckon it's going to be about 210 horsepower once it's all set up. So that's like, you know, nearly a 5 times improvement on power. So yes, obviously a lot of money, but a lot of the stuff was bought brand new. You could do these a lot cheaper if you wanted to. You don't have to go to town on everything. The owner wanted to, he could afford to, so why not? It's his money. So yeah, absolutely cannot wait to get this thing built. So in the next episode, I want to take this 1.2 engine out and get everything ready so I can start putting the 2 litre 16 valve engine in the Nova. Welcome back. Right, today's episode, I want to be taking this 1.2 engine out of this Vauxhall Nova, ready for this mighty C20XE. Right, so as you can see, I've already drained the coolant. Next job, I'm just going to start removing some of this stuff that's in the way. I removed the hoses from the coolant header tank, followed by the retaining screw holding it to the chassis. The coil is then removed. This is holding with 2 10mm Acme screws. The plug and clips and the HT lead just pulls off. The screen wash bottle just pulls out the slot, and the screen wash pump just unplugs. Really easy stuff. I then unbolt the 2 Phillips screws holding on the airbox, lift it up and pull out the breather and vacuum pipes. I unclip the throttle cable. This has a little retaining clip which can be a little bit fiddly, and then remove the cable from the mount on top of the manifold. The servo hose unscrews from the inlet with a 17mm spanner and just pulls out the servo. I then unclip the ROM plug from the bulkhead and the pipe from the map sensor. There are various plugs around the inlet that need unclipping, things like the injector, coolant temperature sensor, idle control valve,
This is all straightforward stuff though. I then remove the fuel feed and return from the throttle body and the earth for the fuel injection system.
So this being a late model single point injection, it does have an ECU, it does have a primitive loom, but it's still a loom. Now, where the C20XEs and some of the later engines differ is that they are removable, the looms, so you can normally unplug them somewhere and isolate it from the rest of the vehicle. On these 1.2 Novas, it is the whole engine and body loom is one. You can't disconnect it. So I'm going to have to disconnect all the plugs to the engine out. But there is some positives to that. For example, the fuel pump wire in here, which would go here, I could utilize this for the standalone injection system. So if I feed the red wire with the blue trace, it makes fuel come out. I hope you can see that. So that's perfect. So I can use some of this wiring, I can use some of the plugs, I can use a few bits and bobs, but I'm just going to have to trim it back basically, decide what I want, what I don't want. But yeah, that should make it a little bit easier for me because I don't have to run now. Now, stuff like the Dizzy doesn't need to come off. However, I'm going to take it off. Just gives it a little bit more room. Now, obviously, this engine bay is absolutely immaculate. The car's had a full bare shell restoration. The engine bay is being painted to a very high standard. So I really don't want to risk scratching it.
The Dizzy is held on with an M8 nut and a clamp and just simply slides out the cam. The HT leads just pull off. I then use a flat screwdriver to push back the tabs on the grille to allow me to remove it. There are 4 across the top and 1 under each headline. I'm really careful doing this as it breaks really easily.
Beautiful. It is in perfect condition, just a little bit dirty. Right, headlights out now. I'm only doing this because they are basically brand new and I don't want to break them. Couple of plugs on the back. Couple of Acme screws. There's a spring on the back of the indicator. It just hooks on. That pulls out like that. That's the spring. And then finally the headlight pulls out. There's a clip here. If you just pull it forward, it should come out. As you can see, that's a brand new headlight.
I then move on to the radiator and hoses. The rad is secured with 2 metal spring clips and just squeezed together to release. With these removed, I can pull the rad back to allow better access to the hoses. While I'm in there, I unplug the reverse switch from the gearbox, the fan plug, and pull off the horn wires. The rad fan is unbolted. This is held on with 2 M6 bolts and just slides out. When the rad and hose assembly can be lifted out, I'll remove the hose that connects the engine to the header tank, and that's the front of the engine stripped.
Right, so the next job, guys, is to remove the bonnet. And as you can see, I've done a bit of masking just to protect things because I'm doing this by myself. So I put loads of tape around things just to stop me from scratching the paint, basically. Paint's in perfect condition and we don't want to ruin it. So let's take the bonnet off. So what I tend to do is just wedge my shoulder underneath it, support the bottom with my hand. I drop that side on the scuttle panel, this side's still on the prop. Remove the bolts. Carefully drop it down onto the scuttle, which is protected. Take the prop out. And then that's it. I'm going to put it down some cardboard. Now look at that, hasn't that let the dog see the rabbit? Right, so next job we need to jack the car up, take the wheels off, take the drive shaft out, hubs, etc. And we can start dropping the engine out. I've just made this very, very crude little pad. It's a foam pad with a bit of wood, just to go under the chassis leg because it's in such good condition I don't want to scratch it. As you can see, these wheels are absolutely mint. So again, don't want to mark them, so I'm using a plastic tool just to pop the caps off. Now these are aluminium caps and they are known for being a bit tight. There you go, not too bad actually. These are actually slightly different to the last ones. The last that I had, these were solid. This is like a steel plate riveted on essentially. But yeah, got them off. And look at them, they're absolutely perfect. A little bit dirty, but amazing. However, I don't like that. They are stretched. Not a big fan of that. I think that needs to be sorted out personally. Right, I've just undone the dry shaft nut. So the dry shaft's now free, taking the brake off. So now I'm going to start taking the suspension apart.
I unbolt the shock from the hub. This is held on with two M12 bolts. A 19mm socket on the impact gun makes light work of them. The bottom pinch bolt is already out, so it's just a case of knocking the lower ball joint out with a hammer.
And there we go, one hub ready to go to Harry Hockley and be machined out so we can put 2 litre hubs inside this.
The tie rod bracket bolts to the cross member with 3 M10 bolts. 1 small captive one and 2 larger bolts with nuts. Once off, I get the caliper out of the way by clipping it to the shock absorber. 1 quick tug and the shaft pulls out of the gearbox. Just be mindful that it will leak fluid, so have something to hand to catch it.
1 charcoal canister. Now this is fitted to Leighton Novas with injection and is basically does something with the fuel vapour. Don't exactly know what, but I think it puts fuel vapour from the fuel tank back into the intake system, but we're not going to be requiring any of this, so that's going. 1 bracket removed and a little bit more weight saving. Right, now I need to repeat the process on this side. So this cap is proving to be a little bit more difficult, like the speed lines I know. So I might have to use a screwdriver and put a little bit of tape around it. Well, hey, got it.
I unbolt the wheel, remove the circlip from the dry shaft and unbolt the 30mm nut holding it in place. The track rod end nut is removed using a 17mm socket and an impact driver. I shot the ball joint out by hitting the side of the carrier with a mallet. Being a tapered ball joint, this trick works normally really well. I can now turn the steering and remove the retaining screw from the disc and the 2 10mm Allen bolts holding the caliper hanger to the carrier. The caliper can then slide off and be clipped to the shock. The 13mm headed lower ball joint pinch bolt is removed and the dry shaft is once again given a tug and pulled out. I then remove the 2 19mm clamp bolts for the shock and pull off the hub assembly. The tie rod is then unbolted from the cross member and taken out of the way. The battery feed to the starter is then removed. Don't worry, the battery was disconnected first, followed by the exciter wire and the engine earth and gear linkage. The engine loom is all part of the main body loom and is fed back up into the top with the rest of the loom. The battery loom is pulled out of the firewall and I took the rest of the loom in the scuttle area out of the way. I did the same with the fuel lines to avoid any snagging and unbolt the map sensor. I then undid the 2 15mm bolts from the front of the downpipe and the 3 30mm rear ones from behind the car. That's the exhaust out of the way.
So we're now at the point where I can drop the engine down under the engine mounts, etc. So I'm going to do this slightly unconventionally. I'm going to drop it all down, unbolt the gearbox, pull it off, slide it out, and then I think I'm just going to lift the engine through the top. I think it's going to be a bit easier to do by myself.
I'm using my trusty old crane, last inspected in 1978, so don't get too close. This is attached to the engine using an eBay special load leveler I got for Christmas a few years ago. Very handy if you're taking lots of engines out. I let the crane take the weight of the engine and box, and then I start unbolting the mounts. 2 knots on the driver's side, but I like to take the complete mount off to avoid scratching the cross member. Followed by 1 big M10 bolt on the passenger side, again I take the whole mount off. And lastly 2 small M10s in the lower floor section. The engine is then carefully dropped down out the way. I then remove the bell housing bolts from the gearbox and prise the gearbox away from the engine. I then jack the engine back up and pull it out over the top. Easy peasy and no damage done to the paintwork, which is the main thing.
Right, in this series we are building a 2 litre 16 valve ITB Vauxhall Nova. And in this episode we plan to put this 210 horsepower motor in this stunning Mark II Nova shell. But unfortunately, before we can do that, there's a couple of things we need to tackle, such as this horrendously dirty gearbox. Now, this is a 30-plus-year-old F20 gearbox. Now, you found these in your Astra GTs, Astra GSIs, Mark IIIs, that is, Cavalier GSIs, basically anything with a 2 litre 16-valve red-top engine. So these are tried and tested, and they're pretty good boxes. However, as they're old, they get very dirty, just like this one. So we're going to clean this up to start off with. So I don't need this mounting bracket. It's different on a Nova. I think this is an Astra one. So that can go.
This plate's got to come off. And finally, the earth strap. Right, let's give it a good clean. So as you can see, I brought the gearbox outside. I'm going to use some alloy wheel cleaner on it. This is really good for getting rid of a lot of the crap on the gearbox. We're also going to use a drill and a brush and a bit of a wire brush and just see what we can do with it basically. So we're going to give it a good soaking first. Don't forget your PPE. This alloy wheel cleaner works wonders, but it's very corrosive, so I'm super careful with it. All holes are filled first beforehand to avoid any acid getting inside the gearbox. Once the cleaner's been applied, I go straight on with the rotary brush to loosen some of the debris. Now ideally this needs media blasting to get an as new finish, but this method's the next best thing and something I can do easily at home. Right, I'm going to let that soak in for 10 minutes or so, and I'm going to use the pressure washer with hot water to try and blast as much of it off, and then I'll repeat the process. As you can see, the cartridge works great, but it's still not quite there. So I repeat the process. This time I use a wire wheel. This helps to abrade the surface and take away some of the corrosion from the aluminium. I use a couple of different attachments to try and get into every little nook and cranny. Wash it all off again. This time I think it's looking a lot better. Right, so this has had quite a few cleans now. I've gone over the whole thing with a little wire brush and some degreaser, and although it isn't perfect, it's not bad at all. So now I'm just going to give it a dusting of Acid X primer and then a little bit of 5-wheel silver just to give it some colour back, basically. Take your eye off it, because obviously old aluminium, it doesn't look brand new anymore. We want it to. As you can see, I'm trying particularly hard not to get paint on the floor, so I mask up the area first. I took the box on the front so I can get to the underside, and I made sure the box was fully drained beforehand to avoid any leaks. Like a lot of people, I hate working in mess. I give the whole thing a few coats of primer, followed by silver paint and lacquer. Dry between each coat with a heat gun. It really is amazing how much a bit of paint can improve the look of something. So now the gearbox is painted and looking much better. It's 24 hours later, that's nice and dry. Next job on the list is to start just getting a few bits on this engine. So I've just put the Nova charging loom on. So this literally goes from the battery, being a late 1.2 when it goes from the battery, positive and negative. The negative bolts to the block. Earlier Novas go to the gearbox, so it's different. This is a better system, and it goes to the alternator like that. So I've put that on. That's a straight fit. I need to put the crank seal on down here. I've got a new one down there. I need to put the lightweight flywheel on. This is 3.5 kilos rather than 7 kilos. So it's half the weight. It's billet steel. Really nicely made. We've also got a brand new LUK clutch. I've also modified the rear mounts. I've cut these little bits out here so we can fit these brackets and spacers, which will line up with the Cavalier gearbox very nicely. Now on looms, I did weld these on. You don't need to weld them on. Most people don't. So I showed you how to do it on looms with welding it. This we're going to do it without, just to demonstrate both styles. Obviously it's not as strong in theory, but it will work just as well. So I've just opened the garage up, brought the crane in, and I've taken this off the engine stand. I need to unbolt this now and then fit that rear crank seal. So here's the new crank seal. It's a Victor Rines one, so OE quality, really good. So I've just put a little bit of gasket sealant around the outside, Victor Rines, and I'm just going to carefully tap it in now. Just really carefully wind it in. Take your time. Just like so. And I'm just going to finish it with a nice big drift. Just carefully tap it home. Take your time. Just do a little bit at once. You know when it's all the way in because it'll make a different noise. Can you hear that? Different noise. More kind of high pitched. And clean the gasket glue off a little bit. And hopefully that will seal nicely. So next job is the flywheel. And we've got brand new flywheel bolts from QED. I'll put a little bit of thread lock on each one, and that's that. This is a lot easier to fit than a new style dual mass. I can assure you, a lot lighter. These will only go on one way, so you just got to turn them until everything lines up, which is that. So I've got a special socket which I've ground flat at the end, so it's not got a taper on it. These are such shallow headed bolts. If you don't do that, they can slip really easily. So I'm just going to loosely put them in with the impact gun. Now I'm going to torque them up properly. So they're torqued to 65 Newton meters plus 45 degrees. Right, now that's torqued up, I'm going to fit the new LUK clutch with new clutch bolts. So with these, you can only get them on one way. If you put it on the other way, it won't actually touch properly, it will catch. It does also say Gearbox side as well, or Betriebsbeste or something like that. That's German, I think, for Gearbox side. Just loosely putting it on, and then I'll line it up. So when I line these up, I don't have the proper tools. What I tend to do is just make sure the disc looks like it's in the centre. So you can see the friction plate there on the pressure plate. Just make sure it's in the same kind of position all the way around, which it is. Nip them up slightly like I have done, and then I can tighten it. Again, tying it in a sequence, and away we go. So I'm going to put this in a slightly unconventional way. I'm going to basically lower the engine in through the top without the gearbox on, just so I've got a little bit more room because I'm by myself. I'm also going to mask off the engine bay and mask off some of the engine just to try and protect it, try not to cause any damage, any scratches, etc. So yeah, once the engine's kind of like put through, I'll slide the gearbox in, bolt it up, and I'll lift it all back in, tighten everything up, and hopefully it'll go in nice and easily. Right, let's drop it down. I'm really careful at this stage. One wrong move could scratch the paint or break something. I lower the engine in stages and I stop regularly to check for clearances, etc. It's definitely doable by yourself, but it's probably advisable to have an assistant if you can. Right, now I just need to hook the gearbox on and put the engine into place. I make it sound easy, don't I? From experience, these engines do not like standing up by themselves, so I'll lower it to blocks of wood and make sure it's nice and sturdy before sliding the gearbox into place, just to avoid any accidents. The gearbox just pushes on with a bit of effort from me. I then start bolting up the bell housing bolts. Now I can raise it back up and start fitting the mounts. I loosely fit the front gearbox mount. The bolt that clamps through the chassis needs cutting down a bit, but I did this off camera. Once that's in, I bolt up the 3 15mm headed bolts into the gearbox. I then move on to the engine mount. Now this is an upgraded 2-litre engine mount bought off eBay. It bolts up using the original Nova M10 15mm headed bolts. The two longer ones go into the rubber part, and then again original Nova nuts and washers hold it onto the chassis. Finally, I jack the back of the gearbox up and fit the modified rear mount using the longer M12 bolts provided. I also put some Loctite on these just to be safe. The floor section then secures with the original Nova bolts and washers. Now that everything's fitted, I make sure all the bolts are tightened and torqued up correctly and remove the jack. And as you can see, the engine is now mounted. It wasn't too bad to do, if I'm honest. A little bit hard by yourself, but yeah, we got there. Still a few bolts I need to tighten up. I need to go check the bell housing bolts and that now, but yeah, we're getting there. So I'm going to demask it, and I think we'll wrap the video up there. So I've been asked a few times how long I spend on these videos, so I thought I'd break it down for you. This is an 11-minute video. I spent 3 hours filming the content and then about 5.5 hours editing. Yeah, that's quite a lot, I know. So that's a total of 8.5 hours. Now, bearing in mind, I work full-time for the NHS and like to spend as much time with my family as possible. So most of the filming is done between me finishing work and my wife, and then the editing is done of an evening after my son is in bed. Now, I pretty much do this for the love, so if you do enjoy my content, I would massively appreciate your feedback and, of course, subscribing. Anyway, back to the video. Right, in the last episode, we fitted this tuned C20XE engine into this Vauxhall Nova shell. Since then, we loosely fitted the radiator. We've also fitted the ITG air filter and the big bore Ashley exhaust manifold. So in this episode, I want to concentrate on plumbing. But before we do that, I want to fit something. So this is a 10-inch slimline fan. As you can see, it's very narrow, about 30mm here.
I think it's 65mm in the centre. It's much slimmer than the standard fan, and this is going to fit and work better. Now you can buy cheap versions of these which look quite similar or very similar to the expensive ones. This is kind of a mid-range one. The cheap ones are like 20 quid. Top end ones are like over £100. I think this was about 40. The quality is definitely better. The plastic's thicker. You can just tell. And the airflow is much better as well. I can't remember the CFM, but it is much higher than the cheap version. So we're going to fit this to start off with. So I want to fit it in the standard area, which is about here. And to fit it, we use these plastic clips, which look like that. And they're going to slide into here. There's 4 of them. You can also fit here. You can also bolt this if you want to. But for this application, we're going to use these 4 clips. We're going to fit it with these retaining straps, these little clips, the springs to stop it rattling, which all come in the kit, and the foam pads as well. I'll show you how to do that now. So before I put these in, I want to put the foam pads on. So literally just little self-adhesive foam pads, and they're going to stick onto these. So we're going to slide it through like so. That's going to push through the rad, hold it on the other side, put the spring on, put the clip on, cut it off, and away we go. So I'm literally just pushing it through to start off with, just so I can see where it comes out the other side. And I can slide the wire through like so. Once that's through, I'm going to put this self-adhesive pad on the other side. And then repeat the process 3 more times. Once the straps are all lined up, I fit the fan, which is cushioned by foam pads, retaining springs, and then locked in place with the retaining clips. Finally, the straps are cut down with side cutters. The whole job was really easy, and I think it looks very aesthetically pleasing. Right, now that's done, it needs wiring up. So I'm going to use the standard Nova rad fan wiring. Here's the plug here. That's for your horn, and that's for your reverse switch. So I don't need them, but I do need to cut the end of that off and put some terminals on to adapt to that. So on the Vauxhall, that's your ignition feed and that's your earth. Now the earth will become earth, I'd imagine, when the switch earths out. So basically that's your switched wire. So with that in mind, we're going to connect the black to the blue and the brown to the black. Because on this, the blue is the positive, the black is the negative. I'm just using standard off-the-shelf blue crimps for these, just normal spray fitment. You can buy dedicated plugs, however I didn't feel it was necessary for just 2 wires. The wiring on the car is all original and some of the insulation tape is coming away. So I tied it up and rewrapped the loom with some cloth tester tape. I've used this lots in the past, and in my opinion it gives a better than factory finish. It also gives a modern look and feel to the wiring. To finish it off, I cable tie up the loom to the fan housing and plug in the horn and reverse switch. I just want to take this opportunity to wish everyone a very happy new year, and let's hope 2024 is good to us all. So now for bridge to temperature switch, it should start up. And as you can see, that is working perfectly. So from experience, when we get these aftermarket hoses, they often come a little bit too long. It's like they give you a little bit of extra just in case. So this top hose is about 1 inch too long. So a little top tip from me to cut them: put a Jubilee clip on tight where you want it to be cut, and then you want a brand new Stanley blade, and you literally just want to slice in and follow the clip round. Keep it nice and square. Look at that, perfect cut. And a perfect fit. Now onto the bottom hose. And exactly the same, bottom hose just seems a bit too long for my liking. So I'm just going to cut it down a little bit. Again, perfect. It fits much better now. The top tip from me is to use a 1/4 drive, 7mm socket and screwdriver handle when tightening hose clips. It's so much easier than a flat screwdriver and it won't slip. If required, you can also add extensions to get into the tight spots. The next hose comes out the rear plastic pipe from the water pump to the bottom hose and then connects to the header tank. I won't be fitting the tank properly as I'm awaiting a new aluminium one. Then it's the hose that comes out the right side of the cylinder head and goes to the right hand matrix pipe, followed by the left matrix pipe,
to the left side of the rear plastic part. I loosely fit the old header tank just to make sure everything lines up, then cut down and fit the new bleed hose that goes from the top of the rad to the header tank.
Right, so that's all the coolant hoses on. I can't tighten the header tank up because we're waiting for a new one. Obviously, because this has got a throttle bodies, it doesn't have like a liquid cooled inlet manifold like the standard vehicle. So normally you would have like a pipe that comes through here, bleeds through the inlet manifold, and then tees into this top hose here. We don't need to do that. So this is more like a traditional Nova would be. So yeah, really simple stuff to be fair. Not a lot to do. Much more simple than the turbo build. Right, next job.
Finally, I fit the custom-made oil catch tank. This required screwing to the inner wing. Overall, the fit's pretty good and it's going to match the other side nicely once done. I cut down a piece of oil breather hose to link up the engine to the tank and fit the ITG oil breather filter. It's far from finished, but don't it look good?
I'm going to be fitting Daewoo Lanos brakes to this ultimate fast road Vauxhall Nova. So you may be wondering why I chose Daewoo brakes. Well, I'm going to explain that later on in the video. But before I do much more, I need to build this up because as you can see, there's no suspension on it. It's completely stripped. So let's get building. So first of all, we've had a delivery from Harry Hockley. They've sent us some 2-litre machined hubs. Now these use the Audi style bearings. And I think they're like custom flanges, I'm not sure. But yeah, very impressive, very well made and nicely finished as well, as you can see. So we've got to fit them. We've also got poly race bushes to go on the front suspension. So these are going to go on the lower arms and the tie rods. So there's the tie rods. It's got the original bushes in. They're okay, but they're very soft. And for this application, it's just not suitable. So if you're new to the channel, guys, over the last couple of months, I've been building what I would consider the ultimate fast road 2-litre 16 valve Vauxhall Nova. Now, as you can see, it's starting to take shape, but we need to build the front suspension up before we can do much more. So that's the bottom arm off. I'm now going to use a Stanley blade just to cut around the outside of the rubber to help get this bush out. Now I've cut this off slightly, I'm just going to put it in the vise and bash the centre out. Like that. And there we go. So these bushes, now the poly race bushes, which means they're really hard. The red, as you can see, you can get poly sport ones, which is yellow and are a bit softer. These are for more like a racing application. You're not going to get much flex out of these. Now the bush comes split, as you can see, like so, which means they're just simply pushing, just like that. And then I'm going to use a little bit of silicone grease on the bush just to slide it in. Beautiful. Now that's ready to go in and bolt up in the standard position. So I'm using plenty of copper grease on the bolt because we don't want it to seize in later down the line. Now these bushes, they are designed to actually spin on themselves, so the stainless steel pin will turn inside the poly bush. A standard metal elastic bush like we had, now they're bonded together, they won't turn, so if you want to tighten them in the road position, because it will give it a bit of spring, if that makes sense. If you kind of tighten it up down here, you're going to putting it under a lot of strain all the time, which you don't want. See what I mean? That's as tight as I can get it. It still moves freely. Right, next job is the tie rod. That's the same process. So first off, just need to undo the bracket. And then exactly the same, I'm going to cut the end of this bush off so I can knock it out with a hammer. Right, that should knock out now. Like so. So exactly the same process, literally push the new ones in. Like so. Push through the middle. Put the tie rod back in. And tighten it back up. Again, I'm going to put plenty of copper grease on this.
Right, I'm going to leave this loose until it's on, just so I can make sure it's in roughly the right place. So the tie rod sits on top of the track control arm, like so. And bolts across, remember, you've got one little bolt that goes in that way, and then two longer bolts with nuts which go upwards. So a bit of copper grease on the end. Right, so the next problem we have is this gearbox bracket here. Now, on a lot of conversions, you've got to cut it off, and this is no exception. You can see the issue? So yeah, I'm just going to discut this off. It's only like a little lug. I don't really know what it's there for, but it's going to catch, and we can't have that. Beautiful. Much more clearance. So if anybody knows why this is actually here originally, let us know in the comments, because to me it looks like, I don't know, it sits in a little jig maybe when they're assembling it, I don't know. Does something, maybe it does something on a Cavalier, I don't know, because I don't know my Cavaliers that well, but who knows, let me know if you do. Next job's the lower ball joint, which literally just bolts through here using two clamp bolts, really simple. Again, I'm going to put a bit of grease on the bolts. Now obviously, because these bushes are solid now, there's not much flex, so these are a lot harder to get in. So what I've done, I've just loosened this off slightly, and I'll tighten it up once the bolts are in. Beautiful. Right, so now we're on to the drive shafts, and I can put a hub carrier on, and then we can get on to the Daewoo brakes. So this is a custom-made drive shaft made by Carl Gibson. Really good quality, well reviewed. Yeah, looks amazing. Obviously the CV joint's brand new, the gaiters are brand new. So yeah, I'm going to slide this in, then we can put the Harry Hockley hub carrier on, and away we go. Now because the CV joint's brand new, they are a little bit tight going in. So I'm just going to use a copper hammer just to knock it. You can hear the noise difference. And that is now in and fitted. Beautiful. Right, sometimes these ABS rings get in the way. Not sure if they are going to on these, so I'm just going to try it. I think it does clear, but just to be safe, I'm going to knock it off. Beautiful. And on, this should slot. I grease up the bolts and then fit them so the nuts face forward. This is a safety measure. If they come loose, the bolts won't fall out under deacceleration. Two M12 bolts clamp the strut to the hub carrier, and one M8 bolt clamps the lower ball joint. I then torque the drive shaft to the hub and fit the split pin to prevent it coming loose. Now that's all done, I can finally tighten a 24mm tie rod nut and pull everything into position. Right, now this is built up, we can finally move on to the Daewoo brakes. Now, back in the 90s, Daewoo was owned by GM, which owned Opel, Vauxhall, Pontiac, Chevrolet, etc., etc., etc. So they did share some components. Now, Daewoo Lanos, I think they did them in the late 90s. They weren't particularly successful in the UK. We did sell some. However, in Europe, they sold quite a few. So when I was looking for some Astra GT 16 valve brakes, which as you can imagine, they're getting quite hard to find now, we're struggling to find some. And ideally, we wanted new if we could, which is obviously even harder to find. So my little brain thought, I wonder if they're the same as anything else. So I did some digging, and I found that if you get a late 90s Daewoo Lanos, I think 1.5 16 valve, I think, they have basically 2-litre Cavalier Astra brakes standard. So got these brand new with carriers as well for 120 quid, which I think is an absolute bargain. I have painted them black because they came silver. We've also got some M-Tech racing pads. These are like a fast road pad and some fancy brake discs. So this is all going to bolt on just like 2-litre brakes would on a normal Nova. Nice and easy. The only problem we do have, it's not a massive issue, but we could only find right-hand calipers. So these are driver's side calipers. So both nipples are going to be, well, basically, when it's fitted to this side, the nipple's going to be facing down. The idea of a nipple is to let the air out, so you want it at the top. So my trick to get around this is I'm going to bleed the brakes with the caliper rotated and not bolted on. bleed it, and then I can bolt it on. Once it's on, it's not going to matter at all, but it's a small price to pay for, you know, having brand new brakes essentially. And brand new calipers. Now these are the hard bit to find. Calipers aren't so bad, but the carrier's really hard to find. So yeah, really happy with these. They came from, I think they came from Spain. European seller on eBay. Like I say, 60 quid a pop. You can't grumble. They come with fitting kit and everything. So let's get them fitted. So these discs are handed. You want the grooves to point towards the front bumper essentially. So when it spins round, it's going to push the air in, cold air in. Some people think you put them that way, but you shouldn't. That is the correct way. So I'll just clean these off with a bit of brake cleaner. And they can simply slot on. Now, because these are conversion hubs, they don't actually have the little screw hole to hold the disc on, but it doesn't really matter. So it's just going to be loose until we get it all bolted up. Now the hangers bolt on with a standard Nova bolt, nothing fancy. A lot of GM cars of this era are the same. They're probably different sizes, etc., but they generally fit between models. You can also fit Saab brakes and stuff. Quite a few things. That's what we was looking for originally. But when these came up at such a bargain, we thought we must have these. So yeah, bolt these on. And bearing in mind, the cost of these, brand new, is what people were selling second-hand Astra ones for, and they didn't come up very often. And often they needed blasting or grinding back, painting. So these were literally ready to give them a quick rub down and paint. And that pad goes through the piston. So it just slots through like so. Again, put a bit of grease on them. I'm not going to fully bolt this up purely for the fact, like I say, the bleed nipple's the wrong way around, so we're going to have to rotate it. But that's basically on. It should have two little bolt pins that go through here, and it's also a spring clip what goes like that. Right, I'm going to take the other caliper off. Now this caliper does look quite similar. This is a late style 1.2 Nova caliper. They're not vented, but they are ATE. They're very similar, just a bit smaller basically. Because it's not a vented disc, it's not as wide here, but yeah, just a slightly scaled down version. So if I clamp this hose off, I can unbolt it quickly, bolt it to this, and we can bleed this up quickly. So this is a hose clamp. You literally slide it over the hose and lock it off like so. That's going to stop most of the fluid coming out. Then you need an 11mm socket to undo the hose. Now these are fairly new hoses. As you can see, they look basically brand new. So I'm not going to bother changing them. I've got new banjo bolts and new washers. Just going to slide them on and tighten them up. Slight issue. So basically this here is pointing out. It should be pointing in slightly. And it's got a little locator tab here, which just fouling the hose basically. So because it's designed to go the other way around, that's pointing the hose out. We can't have that. So I think I can just file that off slightly, and that will just allow me to locate the hose in the proper position. Right, so I've just rigged up a little bleed bottle. I pressurised the system with brake fluid. So I'm just going to put the hose on, put the bottle inside, crack it off. You can see there brake fluid running out. And that should do the job nicely. Just lock that off. Put the cover back on. And now this can be bolted back up. The caliper attaches with two sliding pins. These have a 7mm Allen key head and bolt into the slider. The caliper should always slide smoothly on these. I just use a little bit of silicone grease just to help it on its way.
Then on the front face of the caliper there's an anti-rattle spring. This keeps the caliper located on the brake pads properly and just pushes and prices into place. If I'm honest, this can be very fiddly, especially when they're new. Top tip from me, once they're on, just give them a tap with a hammer to make sure they're seated properly. So there we go guys, we've fitted the Daily Lanos brakes as an upgrade to this 2 litre 16 valve Nova. We've also fitted the Harry Hockley hubs, the Carl Gibson drive shafts and the Polysport polyurethane suspension bushes. So we are going to be upgrading the fuel system on this 1.2 Vauxhall Nova. Now currently it's the standard single point injection system, but we have fitted a 2 litre 16 valve engine with throttle bodies. So we need to make it from low pressure single point injection to high pressure multi-point injection. I'm going to show you exactly how to do it now. And to do that, I need to fit lots and lots of parts. So, for example, fueling. You need to put fuel rail on the injectors. Now, the injectors have been tested by Ian Pepper. One of them wasn't actually working very well. The flow was really bad, so he's rebuilt them. Now they're spot on. I've got a high pressure fuel pump to fit. And I've also got just various bits and bobs. Things like the fuel pressure regulator, hoses, various things. So we're just going to crack on. So I think we're going to start by putting this back plate on, putting the trumpets on, putting the fuel rail on, injectors, all that stuff. I need to connect up the original fuel lines. I can't remember which one's which, to be fair. I can work that out though pretty quick. And just go from there. So I'm just going to use a little bit of silicone grease on the O-rings of these injectors, just so they slide in nicely. And they just pop in like this. Now these are original late C20XE injectors. I've been told by QED these will be good enough. However, if they're not, we do have other options. We've got some C20 LET injectors and a few other bits and bobs. But these, the blue ones, actually flow slightly more than the cream ones. So hopefully they'll be good enough. Right, there's a fuel rail which I've already cut down. Slides on like so. The spacers what go between it. That's the spacer. Nice little machined aluminium spacer. Then you've got the clips that just hold these in place. They slot on like so. Beautiful. So fuel lines, these are the original ones. If I'm honest, I've seen better days. So they won't replace it. Now being an injection model, these are suitable. They're just a bit old and crap, so I'll replace them with some better new fuel lines. First off, I just need to work out which one's which. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to bridge the fuel pump relay, and that should make petrol come out of one, and then I can know which one's the feed, which one's the return. That's the feed. So there's the old line. Not great, very hard. Let's make a new one.
So I'm using new rubber high pressure fuel lines. This is reinforced hose and is OE quality. Being an injection model standard, the fuel lines are all suitable on the car. I'm just replacing this end as it's cracked and perished. The lines that run under the car are plastic and tried and tested. My personal car has 8mm copper lines, these also work well. I use proper 12mm fuel hose clips on these. From experience, Jubilee clips aren't quite as good at clamping smaller hoses.
And there we go, that's the main fuel feed, all connected up now, all cable tie up out of the way once we're done. Now we need to do the return. Now the return's more complicated because we need to put an inline fuel regulator in it. We can't just connect it up like that, it'd be nice if we could. So here's the regulator. It's an Italian-made Malpassi, something like that, no idea, can't speak Italian. But that should, in theory, just go like that. So end of the rail goes to this one, and then that's out. So we're going to have it mounted somewhere like this, I think. I need to make a little bracket for it. But yeah, for now, I'm just going to connect it up, and we'll go from there.
So the Gen V fuel rail isn't handed, however I've chosen to use the near side as the feed and off side as the return. This is the way Vauxhall did it, so it's good enough for me. The return line leaves the rail and goes into the side of the fuel pressure regulator. It then comes out the bottom and goes back to the tank.
So that is the fuel side sorted this end. Now I need to do the fuel pump. Now I believe the vacuum line we don't actually connect because there's no vacuum takeoffs. However, I'm not sure. I might have to find that out nearer the time.
So on single point injection Novas, the fuel pump screws into the top of the fuel tank. There is a handy inspection panel under the rear seats. Pull out the rear seats to gain better access, remove the cover, remove the pump plug, and then remove the feed line. This is held on with one clip. Then there's a ring of 8mm headed bolts to remove, and the pump assembly just lifts out. So factory fuel pump, single point injection, I think these run to like 15, 20 psi. Aftermarket fuel pump, now this is a performance one essentially. They're quite cheap, to be fair, they're only about 40 quid I think. This is for a BMW, but they're all pretty much the same in-tank fuel pumps. I think it's slightly longer, but it's basically the same. I've got one of these on my Black Nova and it works really well. This goes up to about 50 psi, so much better. So what we need to do essentially is swap all the guts from that into that. Alright, so that's the filter. It's definitely done its job, it's quite grubby. This bit here is not actually a hose, it just supports it. So knock that off. That's the old one out. So the new one has the same plug, which is handy. I am going to replace the feed pipe because that's not reinforced. It's very soft and I don't trust it. So yeah, rather than have issues down the line, we're just going to replace that. I used a piece of the same 8mm ID fuel hose I used at the front to replace the feed pipe. The pump slots in and it clips into place. So there we go, all built up, new pump, new filter. Now the pump is slightly narrower than the old one, so I'm going to put a cable tie around here, just hold it all together. New hose, some new clips, original plug fitted like I said. Yeah, good to go with that. So let's get it back in the tank. I actually had to swap the pickup filter for a smaller one supplied in the kit. The first one interfered with the tank baffles. Refitting the pump assembly is just the reverse of removing it. Fit the ring of bolts, tighten them evenly, fit the fuel lines, fuel pump plug. Nice and easy stuff really. The fuel system is now suitable for most multi-point injection Vauxhall or other engines running 2.5 to 4 bar fuel pressure systems. I finish it off by refitting the cover and putting the car hood back down.
So this 2 litre 16 valve throttle bodied Vauxhall Nova is getting close to running. But before we can do that, we need to sort out this minor issue. Now there's currently no exhaust on this car whatsoever. So if we did start it up, there's going to be flames coming out of here. I don't want it. So let's sort it. So the plan for today's video is to make a full 2.5-inch exhaust system for this car. So first thing I'm going to do is put this big bore Ashley manifold on. Now this is a 2.5-inch exit. Obviously it's not a direct fit, it will bolt on, but I need to put a flange or something on this. So let's bolt this up and see what we've got to work with. By the way, I hope you like my new 2-post lift. It's going to make this job a lot easier. Now this is going to have to come back off for welding properly. So for now, I'm just going to put a couple of nuts on, just hold it into place. Right, let's send it up. Right, as you can see, the exhaust exits here. At the minute, we've got basically, it did have a standard 1.2 system on it. This is the latest style 1.2 bracket. It's still got all the heat shields. These are going to be in the way. We're also getting rid of the standard gear shifter. So we're putting a Cavalier gear shifter internally in it, which is going to give us a little bit more tunnel room. So I think the first thing I need to do now is remove these shields and take the shifter out. So these are held on with 9mm nuts. And if I'm honest, it's quite unusual to find an Nova with these nowadays. Mine certainly don't have them. It's already got like a Sportex catback system, which is modest, is very quiet. I think it's only 2-inch. It's not really suitable for this application, so we're going to get rid of that. Next off's the standard shifter. As you can see, it's right in the way. Once this is gone, we're going to have loads more space. And out she comes. Right, let's get the rest of the exhaust off. So here's the rear silencer. It's just held on with one kind of exhaust clamp here. I'm going to bracket this end. It just slides off. As you can see, the car though is absolutely beautiful condition underneath. Everything's really clean. All the brake pipes are new. Hoses, fuel tank looks brand new. Just everything. Handbrake cables, the lot. It's really tidy. Best Nova I've ever seen, without a doubt. So I'm going to unbolt this and slide this off. And then we're going to blank canvas then. And that is that. So now we've got a blank canvas. What I'm basically going to do is start from this end and work my way back. Now I have got some V-band connectors which need welding onto this and onto the new exhaust. I've got quite a few bits of bobs, assorted bends, a couple of boxes. I think we can do a nice job of this. I'm going to try and incorporate the original hangers, just make it nice and solid, and hopefully make it so it doesn't rattle too much, because obviously with a bigger exhaust, it's not got the biggest tunnel anyway, it can be a bit tight. So we'll see what we can do. So this is what we've got to work with. We've got a couple of straight lengths, we've got a 90, a couple of 45s, or maybe 3 45s actually. I've got a little flexi, got a couple of sets of V-bands. Now these are really good because they're quick release essentially. Once you undo the clamp, they just pull off. You can adjust them easily and they don't seize up like traditional clamps like these do, which used to just slide over, bolt on. We're not going to use them. We've got a couple of silencers, got these brackets which go around the silencer just to reinforce them. Got some exhaust rubbers, we've got some hangers and some little hanging tabs. And that is pretty much it. Now this is mild steel. It was supplied by Ashley as a kit. I think it's about 200 quid. It's not the best stuff in the world. However, it will make a decent competition exhaust, which is what we're after. We're going to paint it anyway. Yeah, stainless would be nice, but it would cost a hell of a lot more. So, first thing I'm going to do is to tack this into place somewhere like this. Then we're going to have this coming off it, something like that. All being well. Right guys, I'm going to have a go using a TIG welder on this. Wish me luck. TIG welding looks so easy on videos, but I can assure you it isn't. However, like anything, practice makes perfect, so I'm going to carry on practicing. Right, I've just removed the manifold so I can weld it better, because I'm not very good at TIG welding, so this is kind of practice for me. But yeah, I can just do it better on the floor. I'm using a 1.6mm red tungsten and a 1.6mm welding rod. It sets 40 amps. I've got no idea if this is the right setting, but it seems to be okay. If you know more, let me know in the comments, please. I never know what cup size to use, so again, any feedback would be great. So just before I put it back on, I am going to cut this, put these V-bands in, weld it up fully, and then this bit of the exhaust, once it's painted, is completely done. As always, I'm just using a standard 4.5-inch grinder to cut the pipe with a 1mm Bosch cutting disc. Works great and does a lovely job. Once I'm happy with it, I slot over the V-band and tack it on with a TIG. I use an access stand to support the exhaust. One key to TIG welding or any sort of welding is to stay comfy. You need to have good movement to pull off a decent weld. Right, so manifold's on and painted. I'm going to use this as a centre silencer, and I've just cut this, which is going to slot on the end of that, weld into that, and away we go. I'm now using the MIG welder as well, just because I'm getting on better with it. I struggle with the TIG, if I'm honest. MIG is definitely easy to learn with. Yes, the welds aren't as pretty, but it's easier and faster for me, and probably stronger as well, as I know what I'm doing more. I line up the sections by eye and tack them into place, and I take it back down and seam weld the joints on the floor. This way is much easier. Welding upside down is never nice, and it's a skill I'm yet to master. I add reinforcement plates to the silencer,
They were included in the kit and should help prevent any stress fractures in future. They look pretty cool too and may help save denting the silencers going over speed bumps. Even though MIG welding's faster, the project still took me a day to complete. Good custom exhausts are expensive for a reason. So I bolt the centre section back on with a V-band and use a piece of wood to prop it into place. I then make hangers using 8mm round bar, a vise, some pliers and a big hammer. These are cut to size afterwards and welded to the straight section of pipework. One either side so they fasten onto the original donuts. I take the centre section off again and weld everything up properly. I fit the reinforcement brackets on the other side of the silencer and stitch them on. I start from the centre, then use the heat to help hammer down the edges before I weld them into place. I cut down the straight length just short of the fuel tank as it needs a slight bend there. I use a piece of cut down 45-degree angle, so it's more like 20 by the time I've cut it down and done with it. Right, so the next bit's going to be a 45-degree off that. I'm going to cut about that much off the end, put a 90 on that, and then put the back box on there. Now I've had a quick mock-up just by looking at it, and I think that's about right. Now I've been kind of doing things like this for like getting on for 20 years now. It's a lot harder than it looks, but I've got a bit of an eye for looking at an angle and seeing. So fingers crossed, that should be okay. Obviously, there's probably a special tool to measure all these things. I haven't got one. I just do it by eye and it tends to work okay. So let's have a go, see what it looks like. I carefully tap this into place, however not quite in the right place, so I'll snap it off and do it again. And then cut a 90 down the middle, making another 45. Right, I've just whipped it back off. I'm going to cut this bit off here. And this 45, which was a 90, will kind of go on like here somewhere. And the back box should fit to that. Everything that's been tacked is welded up properly. I do this as I go along to make sure everything stays in alignment. In theory, if I wait until the end, then it could twist slightly, so I'd rather do it as I go along. The exhaust is then fitted again and the rear silencer is tacked on to the piece I cut earlier. I make a basic L-shaped hanger, tack it on, followed by a full seam weld. I cut a 3-inch exhaust tip off an old system and tack it onto the silencer. I then remove everything and weld up all the remaining joints. I don't now look good. Right, so the full system's now made. I'm really pleased with it. So the next job's to paint it. But before I can do that, I need to clean this up. I need to abrade it essentially, give the surface a nice key and get rid of a lot of this brown area where it's burnt and welded. So I'm going to use a wire brush and some 400 Abranet cloth just to take the shine away. Just like that. So now I just need to continue that over the whole exhaust and it's ready for paint. Right, so that's the whole thing now done. I've masked the end of the tip up. Now it's just a case of painting it. So we're going to be using this extremely high temperature exhaust paint. It's got good reviews and I think they're about 2 for 20 quid. Now according to the instructions, all you need to do is prep the panel by keying it, degrease it, and then we're ready to go. So we've done that. Give it a good shake. Let's put some paint on. I give it 3 good coats of paint. I use a heat gun to dry it between coats. Once done, I leave it 24 hours to cure before fitting it back on the car. So that's the full exhaust painted, dry and fitted. Now the last thing I like to do is I like to put Jubilee clips around the exhaust rubbers, like so. So it's an old Jubilee clip, it doesn't have to be a new one. And it just tightens it up and stops it rattling a little bit, makes the exhaust a little bit stiffer. It's just a top tip for me, especially on a low modified car. Just helps. Beautiful. And I've also, off camera, just made a little support for this end and done the same with a Jubilee clip. I want to get this ultimate fast road ITB C20XE Nova running. However, we do have a bit of an issue. Now, I've already spent quite a lot of time stripping the original loom back, taking all the insulation off, connecting up the wires that need to be connected to make this vehicle run. So we need an ignition feed, earth, battery feed. Obviously, it needs tacho and that. It doesn't need that, but we're going to connect it, coolant temperature sensor, all them kind of bits. Now, the DCA loom plugs in to what it needs, basically. Every wire is marked up. So the injector wiring, for example, they're marked at 1 to 4. So you know exactly what you're doing. Coolant temperature sensor, crank sensor, the coil part, everything just clips up just nicely. So I connected everything up just quickly. And I thought, let's see if it starts. First off, straight away, fuel pump is not running. So I figured, well, that's a bit of an issue. The fuel pump relay is connected. It's got all the power feeds and that, but it's not getting a trigger from the ECU to make the fuel pump kick in. So, bridge the fuel pump, beautiful. It's now popping and farting through the inlet manifold. So something clearly wasn't right with the ECU. It obviously wasn't sparking or injecting at the right time for it to be firing back through the inlet. So I tried plugging my laptop in to have a look, and my laptop's really old, really slow. It kept crashing, kept causing me problems. Now, bearing in mind, I was sold this as plug and play by QED. They said, plug it all in, it will work. You can run it like that, but it advised you to tune it on a rolling road. So I kind of gave up with it. My laptop, like I say, wasn't working. Spoke to a mobile tuner, and he's come over and had a look at it. He came over to put the map on, and the map file was not on the USB supplied by QED. They said it was, but it wasn't. So we tried going on the website to see if we've got it. It should just be a basic, generic ITB map file for these C20XE engines. Should be able to put that on and it should start. Obviously, it still needs setting up perfectly on a rolling road, but it should start. Well, it doesn't have one. It's got a map on the ECU, but it's not the right one because it's doing everything wrong. So although we can't get it running, we can still do things to this car. So my plan is I'm going to basically wire it all up properly and get it ready for the rolling road the best I can. So I'm going to start by drilling a hole in the bulkhead for the loom to go through. So I've drilled the bulkhead there because it's out the way, and also the original ECU mounts there. So I can use the original bracket and it's all going to look nice and neat and nice and factory. So now this is drilled, I've also just filed the edges slightly just so the plug fits through. And I've fitted a grommet to this. It doesn't come with a grommet. So I can push this through the bulkhead. And then my plan, I'm going to fill this with sealant. And then tape the loom up like I already have done to start off with the cloth tape. It's going to look really nice. But yeah, I just want to fill that with sealant because I don't want it to get any water in. I want it to be as factory as possible. So this should just slide through here nicely now. Then I can start just fastening everything up properly. So the fuel pump relay fits very nicely there. So I'm just going to use this original bolt hole. Then I'm going to start taping this loom up a bit more. Now this doesn't actually need taping. I'm purely doing it just to make it look a bit neater. So I'm just looking how I'm going to do things. And basically these wires here, that's your main permanent 12 volt feed. And then you've got your fan pump relay wires. Two of them are 12 volts. So I've looked in the loom. This is the factory loom. And that's a nice 12 volt feed there. It goes straight from the battery. So I'm going to run this loom down here. And then back up with the rest of the loom. And connect them there, I think. That way it just looks nice and neat, nice and tidy. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to cut these down a little bit. I'm going to put a plug on these so I can connect it up to this. So if we ever want to, we can remove it nicely. So to make it a little bit easier, I'm going to strip this right back, solder all the reds together and add that to the end of it. And then it's simply just plug and play. So I'm using these really handy Irwin strippers. They make light work of insulation removal even on the thinnest wires. Once stripped, I twist the wires together and solder them up. Once cooled down, I slide over a piece of heat shrink and shrink it on with a heat gun. And then slide over the plug weather seal and use crimping pliers to crimp on the pins. These are proper non-insulated crimping pliers. These aren't like the normal red, blue and yellow ones you see on the market. The plug then clips over the pin and I use another pin to push the seal into place. I don't that look professional. So now this end's done, it's time to move on to the other end. So the loom's going to tuck under here. And it's going to connect up here and kind of follow what's left of these wires. So I think I'm just going to cut up there to be safe. I cut the wire to length and repeat the process as before. I'm very passionate about neat wiring and find this part particularly therapeutic. Next I move on to the relay wiring. The 12 volt feeds of the wires are soldered together, but the trigger wires are still bare. The brown and blue controls the fan. As I'm using the standard Nova fan wiring, which I explained in the previous video, this won't be necessary. So I'll just heat shrink the end to make it safe and fold it over. I then connect the brown and purple to the fuel pump positive. Now on Vauxhalls, that's a red and blue wire. So that's the ECU 12 volt battery feeds, earth and fuel pump wire connected. Next up, dash and ignition wiring. So the yellow is the 12 volt from the ECU for the dash, and the brown is shift light. We don't need either of them, so I'm just going to put some heat shrink over the top. Just to make them safe. Again, I use a heat gun to shrink it. You can use a blowtorch, but you need to be careful because too much heat will obviously make it melt. The white DTA wire needs connected into a 12-volt ignition feed. I used the original black wire to the coil. If you have a 1 litre Nova, this is not suitable. It's only 6 volt, but all other models have a decent 12-volt feed. Again, I build the plugs in the same way. I also soldered the 2 black ignition positives together. However, I did later find this wasn't required as it was just a piggyback for the original ignition amp. The green wire is the rev counter wire. Not all models have this, but this one did. This connects to the black wire on the DTA loom. I have no idea if this signal is going to be the same, but I'm sure we can tweak it somewhere. So believe it or not, that's all the hard wiring now done. Now I just need to strip down the original Nova loom and cut out and remove all the original ECU wiring. And this technically doesn't need to be done, but I just want to do it to make the engine bay look a bit cleaner. I cut each plug off one by one and then pull the wiring through the bulkhead into the interior. Now, as you can probably see, I've trimmed this down quite a lot. There's quite a lot of wires removed. We've still got some of the ECU wires here. Looking at it, most of them are earths, etc., and a few dash wires, which we won't need. So they can be cut off. But until it's running, I'm going to leave it. This is some of the loom I've removed, as is all that. And I've been around and taped up all the loom, with the exception of this bit here. This is thinned down dramatically. We must have taken 20 wires out of here. As you can see, it's much neater. All fits well, as it should. Everything's got the Tessa tape on, which is nice cloth tape. I will do this bit once it's running, but for now, I want to leave it. Right, if I'm honest, I'm kind of running out of things to do on this car now. However, there is still one little thing. We haven't got a throttle cable, so I'm going to do that now. I'm going to modify the existing 1.2 throttle cable and make it work for this application. So this has been quite a stressful video to film. I've been about 3 weeks making this, which is a lot longer than normal. Now, it should have been running 3 weeks ago, which is kind of what I promised you all, but it's, you know, I've been let down a little bit. The software's not on the ECU, various things, don't have the map, all these little problems. Not really my fault, it's just one of them things. So yeah, I'm sorry I've let you down a little bit. However, hopefully soon it's going to be running anyway. I'm not going to commit a time, but hopefully soon we'll have it running. Right, let's crack on with the throttle cable. So that is the standard 1.2 injection cable. Now this end fits onto the throttle cable. There's a spring on the end, you can probably see, and it clips in. That goes for the bulkhead, and then this end will obviously attach to the throttle body. This slides down here underneath the battery area. Goes for a grommet in the bulkhead. It needs to go to basically just to here and slide through, but I'm going to make this as short as possible, which will give it the maximum adjustment just in case I cut it wrong. So the outer cable wants to be cut about here. And I think what I'm going to do, I'm just going to mark that with a bit of tape. So then I need to cut the outer here. Now that's going to be a challenge, but we'll give it a go. Right, so we don't need that in. That did go on the original throttle body. So just to make it a bit easier, I'm going to cut this off so I can pull the inner cable out. I mean, I'm not going to catch it when I cut it, so let's go. And then we can cut it just here. All right, now all I need to do is cut this bit to length and put a nipple on it. So hopefully you can see that end is connected up, so it just clips on at the top, and that's where it comes through the bulkhead. That end's fed through there, and then this end just sits here, and that's the excess. Slide this through here, and that is where it needs to be cut and joined. So the original inner cable is coated in a plastic layer, so I'm just using some wire strippers just to carefully cut it and slide it off, because unfortunately the plastic layer is actually fouling the nipple. That's the plastic layer. Here's the nipple, and that locks off with grub screws. Now that fits, I just need to cut the end off. This ultimate fast road Vauxhall Nova is nearly ready to road test, but there's still one massive problem with it. That's right, no gear lever. So in today's episode, we're going to be fitting this upgraded gear shifter and gear linkage in this Vauxhall Nova. Now, this is out my black Nova SR behind me. That's a rose jointed gear linkage, which means all the factory joints have been taken out and been replaced with rose joints. Now, I made this many years ago,
and it's still in perfect condition, has no play in it, and gives a really nice direct feel. As good as you can get, really. This here is a Calibra internal shifter, same as the Cavalier, and basically this is going to be mounted inside the car rather than outside, which gives you more exhaust clearance, as I showed you in the previous video. It's been modified on the end so it will fit onto this, all work perfectly. And finally, this is a little platform I made which just raises it up 20mm, makes it a little bit easier to change gear in anger. So I'm going to show you exactly how to fit all this in today's episode. So although them bits have been fitted to a Nova, it's not a direct fit. So to start off with, we need to take the seats out and take the carpet out. So the seats are held in with 4 M8 bolts and then a little clip at the back of the rail, then they just slide out and pull out. And the carpet's held on with a couple of sill trims which are held in with Phillips screws. These just unscrew and then the carpet just slides out nicely. Right, next job's to remove some of this sound deadening. Now, I don't really want to do this because it's in such good condition. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cut along here because this is the area which we need to remove. And hopefully I can put some of it back. Not all of it, but some of it back. So I use my trusty old scissors just to cut this. It cuts really easily, to be fair. You could use a knife, I guess, but scissors did the job for me. Then I move on to spot weld drilling. Now, I don't like drilling spot welds. I don't find it easy to do. I find it quite tedious. But I persevered, drilled them all out, and then used a little separator to pull everything apart. I then cut the section out with an angle grinder, giving me a little bit more room to work, and I want to put this section back in, hence doing it this way. Right, it's out now, as you can see. Now, if I'm honest, I didn't do a very good job with the spot weld drill. The drill bit was about burnt out, so I struggled, so I've ripped a little bit, but I've cleaned it up. I'm going to seal this in, and it does actually bolt on as well, so that's going to cover over the top like that. Beautiful. I'm just going to use some of this sealant just to seal it all in, hold it together, so we know it's nice and watertight. Now, I deliberately left this like this because I still want to give it some structure for the carpet, because we want the carpet to look as factory as possible. We want to try and put the centre console in. So I'm trying not to remove too much of this. I'm hoping I can use a little bit more of this and incorporate it somehow. And obviously just have a hole or something for the shifter rod to go through. We'll look into that later. For now, this will do. I put a smear all the way around just to help make the whole thing watertight, stop water ingress. Right, so now we're on the underside of the vehicle and we're going to screw it on using 4 M8 nuts and washers. Of course, this would have been a lot easier with the exhaust off, but hindsight is a wonderful thing. Next job, while it's on the lift, I'm going to put the gear linkage on. Now this is what I was talking about. All these joints have been replaced with rose joints. It's much more direct and solid, and there's no play in it whatsoever. I've also had solid bushes made for this pivot point here. Now normally they've like a nylon bush rubber O-ring around them, so they've got a bit of play in standard. These are absolutely solid. So combined, that's a really nice shifter. So a little bit awkward. I'm just going to try and squeeze it in. You're probably not going to see too much, but it fits just like a standard one does. Another thing I'm going to do away with a standard pin which kind of goes through this end of the linkage because it's a bit crap. As you can see, I'm not very happy with it. I've got a nice solid steel one which goes through, and again that's going to remove a little bit more play. There's a little clip that just slides on the back of this, like so, and then that goes through the centre of the linkage on that solid bush into the engine mount, and it pivots on that. Again, you're not going to be able to see this, just have to trust me. And there we go, in and working. So all that's left to do now basically is to drill the hole in this bit here for the rod to go through to connect it all up. And the hole needs to be just there. And I can't get that in. But I do have this. Looks like it still don't fit. Dash out then. So I start by taking the steering wheel off and the steering column cowling, followed by switches, then a few screws down the side of the dash, switches in the centre, ashtray, radio, glove box. It's all pretty simple. A
little bit time consuming, but it's really not too bad to do, and I'd advise anyone to give this a go, as it can be done with just basic hand tools and it will improve your confidence working on cars. Now the dash is loose, I remove the duct in and just feed some of the wires through so I can pull it all out. That gives me good access to the heater matrix, which now also needs to come out, unfortunately. This is held on with 3 10mm headed nuts and screws, and obviously the hoses on the other side. Undo all them, it will just slide out. And there we go. Hopefully I made that look quite easy. While the dash is out, actually, it's made it easy to get the ECU out. I'm also going to drill a hole in the bulkhead here for the wiring loom. So it's not a bad thing. I didn't envision having to take it out. One of them things, but it wasn't the end of the world, to be fair. And it only took me about 45 minutes. So let's drill the holes finally. I set the dog silly rabbit. And here's a very crude template I made up from my car. Obviously there's a line there to line it up, top and bottom. Ooh. Something like that. I'm using a really cheap Chinese special cutter. I think I got it from Temu. Not that I'd recommend Temu, but you know, they were cheap and it has done the job very nicely. So I drilled 2 holes, then connect them up with a cutting disc on the grinder. Right, so I've cut it, I've cleaned it up a little bit, and I'm just going to put some Acid X primer on it. And there we go, just going to slide that in. And then I'm going to put the 5mm drill bit down here. And that's going to line up with there. That's locked into the neutral position. As long as that's in the neutral position, the other end I can tighten it up. And that'll be the gear linkage set up now. I'm just going to bolt this to the ground. So this secures down with 4 M6 nuts. I use nylock nuts just to ensure it doesn't come loose. And I tighten them down evenly. I raise the car back up and fasten the linkage to the gear selector. First, second, third, fourth, fifth, and reverse. Beautiful. And we could still take a little bit more play out here. You can actually get an aluminium upgrade for that. But that's so much better than factory, so much more direct. Now, as I want to fit the center console, I want to fit that panel I removed earlier. So I've trimmed it down just so it fits underneath the selector rod. And then I've drilled some little holes in the side and made some little brackets which are going to connect the two should you ever need to take it out again. These are just made out of thin strips of aluminium and should do the job perfectly. So I put it back in the car, make sure it all lines up nicely, drill the holes and then rivet it up with just some little aluminium rivets. I then put the sound deadening back into place and tape everything up with some duct tape. Now obviously you're not going to see any of this, it doesn't really matter, but I just wanted to make sure it was all held together properly. I then put the carpet back into place. Now I did need to cut the centre out sadly, but this is going to be completely covered by the centre console, so it doesn't matter too much. And there we go guys, carpet's in and this is where we're at. So I've also, just off camera, I've cut down an old centre console, so I've cut this bit out a little bit. I've cut the back out quite a lot and I've made a new plate basically, it goes in the bottom, hooks in, and that's going to be covered in leatherette, similar colour, and then that's going to slot on there and hopefully it's going to look alright. Something along the lines of that. The dashboard bracket at the back does need to be cut off. I've had to cut the back of this out. Again, I've done that off camera. So yeah, that is basically the finished article. We can get a bigger gaiter here for this. The dashboard's going to sit on that and hold it into place. So yeah, we can get a slightly bigger gaiter so it fits a little bit better. But overall, you can't really tell it's been modified. So I'm really chuffed with that. And much, much better gear change. So since the last video, I've made a servo line. Now I've used a barb fitting off the throttle bodies. I've had to drill and tap it before the throttle body, not after it. So before the throttle body here. And I've used some braided silicone line connected to the original Nova hose. And I've also kept the original plastic valve just to stop any leakage of vacuum pressure. So I've neatened up this wiring here. I did say I wasn't going to do that until it was running, but I thought it's going to be okay. I don't need to worry. Also fitted the coolant header tank, which has been painted and filled it with coolant. Topped up gearbox with oil. Fitted the front bumper as you can see. And I've painted the spark plug cover, which looks pretty good if I do say so myself. Which obviously is going to go here. Like that.
However, I'm not going to screw it down yet because obviously it doesn't run. I want to make sure it's running bang on before let's put it on, so that's going to be our last job. It does look nice though. And I've also put the dash back together and made the centre console panel, which fits in here very nicely. Covered it in leatherette, and it's also got a handy little USB-C charger and a USB with a little volt gauge. So handy for road trips, which this car's going to be doing many of. Shifter works lovely, as you can see. And I've retorqued the wheels to 110 Newton meters and fitted centre caps, and that's about it. We're about ready to fire it up. Now the engine bay is not completely finished. We've still got to fit the spark plug cover and the grille, but doesn't it look fantastic? I'm absolutely thrilled with it. It's come out really nice, and I love all the colours and all the contrast. I just think it looks absolutely stunning. So over the moon with this. Now I'm so proud of how this car's come out. That proud that I'm going to put my name on it. So I'm going to use one of these conversion plaques to mark it with a number. Now this is 008. This is the 8th car I've built, and it was finished March 2024. And this is going to go pride of place in the engine bay. It's going to stick on with some double-sided tape onto the bulkhead, just like so. And don't that look fantastic? So if you've been watching the series, you know I've been having a nightmare trying to get the vehicle running. Now it's running twin 45 Gen throttle bodies and a DTA ECU. Now the DTA ECU was meant to be supplied with a map, and I don't think it is. So that's my problem. QEB have now sent the base map over. And since the last video, I've had 2 really nice guys approach me and say, look, Dan, see you struggling. Do you want us to come over and give you a hand? So today we've got Tom coming from Yorkshire, all the way from Yorkshire, free of charge, bless him, to help us get this running. Now he should have a base map and also a slightly modified map for one of these engines with these throttle bodies and cams. So fingers crossed, we can get it all loaded up and get it working. Now we just need to wait for him to arrive. Right, so it's an hour or so later and Tom's on with putting the map on. We did have a few connection issues with the laptop, but that's now sorted. The first job is to install the base map, then move on to setting up the TPS. Now this should read about 200 millivolts with the throttle closed and around 4,900 millivolts with the throttle fully open. As you can see, we're getting readings all over the place. It should be a nice linear increase, but it's jumping around and reads up to 7.2 volts, where I thought it should be. So I try setting up the TPS, but it's not helping and something's clearly wrong. I remove it again and find it really notchy. Basically, the ECU thinks the throttle's at 100%, which obviously isn't because it's closed. So this is going to flood the engine and cause lots of overfueling. So we've got to abort it and get a new one ordered. I'm really gutted, but hey ho, let's hope we don't have any more issues. So it's been another week. The TPS has come and has been fitted. Tom is back, and we're hopefully going to get it running today. Fingers crossed. Right, so we're straight in. We're going to load it up and set the throttle position sensor to, I think it's 200 millivolts.
So the throttle's working now, like it wasn't working before, was it?
Yeah, is it reading right?
Yeah, it's still at 25%, that's probably why it won't start.
Yeah. Perfect, so the throttle is now working, TPS is set up. I'll tighten that up then. Right, so I'm just whipping the spark plugs out, purely for the fact it has been flooding itself a little bit. So I want to take them out, dry the pistons the best I can, dry the plugs, maybe put some new ones in, give it the best opportunity to start. As you can probably see, that's absolutely dripping wet. Yeah, they're all absolutely drenched. So, hopefully, fresh set of plugs, and we should be away. Right, so these are brand new spark plugs, NGKR ones. We're gapping them to 1mm. That's what I've been advised to do. So, I don't have a 1mm feeler gauge, so I'm going to put 2 together, which makes it a millimetre. And as you can see, sorry, it's a bit blurred. That's a nice tight fit in there. Perfect. I carefully fit the spark plugs back into the engine, and Tom double checks the HT leads to make sure they're going to the right place from the core. Right, will it start? Right, so it's still not started. Getting rather frustrating. We've checked everything again. All looks good. So now we're just going to check the compression. I mean, it should be okay, but we're going to check it. So as you can see, the compression gauges aren't really registering, which if I'm honest is really odd, as it does feel to have a bit of compression. And there's definitely pressure coming out of the exhaust. You can't really tell here, but I've already checked the cam belt time and it's spot on. And I've also checked the fuel pressure and removed the air filter so I can physically check the valves are actually opening and closing. This really isn't making any sense to me now. My head's telling me that the timing's off, despite all the pulleys lining up. So I'm going to pull off the cam cover and have a look inside, just to make sure everything is spot on under there.
I've worked out the problem. A little bit of a schoolboy error, unfortunately. So both cams are pointing in the same direction, meaning that the valves are all opening at the same time. So exhaust and air goes in and goes straight out the exhaust. Oops. So basically what's happened, this cam sprocket, it's a vernier one, it looks like at some point it's been taken apart and it's been put back together 180 degrees out. So although the time marks are out okay on the outside, the inner dowel's in the wrong place. So yeah, stupid area. I should have noticed when I built it up. I didn't. Obviously, I was concentrating on getting this bit timed up. I didn't really consider this. Turned over nicely because it would do. But basically, yeah, the air and the fuel is going straight in and straight out the exhaust. And that, I am certain, is the reason why it won't start. So let's rectify that issue and make it start. So this is the original cam. And as you can see, the lobes should be opposite. So the way it is at the minute, these are pointing to the front, these should point to the back, not the front. So that's the problem. I'm kind of annoyed with myself, but it's a massive learning curve, and I'm kind of glad that I've done it because I've learned from it in a way. I know that sounds stupid, and hopefully you guys will learn from it, and hopefully won't make the same mistakes I did. So I'm going to crack on now. Luckily for me, it was actually quite easy to rectify. I unbolted the 4 M6 vernier pulley bolts and managed to hold the pulley in place while turning the camshaft with a 24mm spanner. I retarded it exactly 180 degrees, then refitted the bolts to lock it off. I then turned the engine over a couple of times to check the timing. Everything was spot on, so it was just a case of fitting the spark plugs, removing the old gasket sealer using a blade and a wire brush, followed by a brake cleaner and a wet and dry vacuum. I refitted the cam cover using a new gasket, torqued down the M6 bolts, refit the hoses and the plug leads. So that's it, it's back together, but will it start? Now I do need to bridge the fuel pump relay. For some reason it's not working properly, so I'm going to look at that later. But for now I'm just going to bridge it, give it a crank, and if it starts I'm going to be a very, very happy boy. So that was the first start. I'm absolutely thrilled. Now I've been about 3 or 4 weeks trying to make this video, but we did get there in the end. Like I said, I did a bit of a stupid mistake. I won't do it again. I've learned from it. Hopefully you guys will, and hopefully you'll hit the subscribe button and show some support for the channel. It needs fine tuning on the rolling road, but I've basically done my job. I am absolutely over the moon. Oh, that's fun. So I've been building this heavily modified Ultimate Fast Road C20XE Vauxhall Nova for the last few months. And it's pretty much done, but we still need to do 3 final things. So number 1, I've pulled the car on the lift and I'm going to give it a really good check over. So I'm going to start with doing the basics, like check all the engine oil, coolant levels, make sure all that side of things look spot on, screen wash level. Then we're going to send the car up and just check all the bolts. Obviously, I've had a lot of components off this, so I just want to check suspension bolts, struts, all the ball joints, all that kind of stuff, just to make sure everything's tight, double check everything. So this is going to be a fast car, so we just want to make sure everything is spot on underneath and we've got no issues. One big problem I did find is the offside lights were out. Now, this is front and back, so it's clearly like a fuse issue or something along them lines. So I've pulled the fuse cover off and found a blown 10 amp fuse. Nice and easy. I probably did it when I pulled the clocks out. So never mind, put a new fuse in and now everything's working, all the lights are working. So that's pretty much ready for test. Right, now that's done, it's time to take it for MOT. So let's get it down there and see what happens. Now Test has sent the vehicle up, looked underneath, done everything he needs to do, and all that looks spot on, which is just as I imagined. I had no doubts about this car. Next up, brake rollers. Again,
Didn't really have any doubts. Obviously, I can't check this at home, but the car drove really well, so I assumed it'd be okay. Which is just what it was. All the brakes locked out as they should. Everything's perfect, bang on. I've also just made a quick throttle stop. Now, the Nova pedal has more travel than the throttle bodies have. So that basically means the pedal gets kind of like most of the way down. The cable and the throttle bodies are at the limit, but obviously the pedal wants to go further. So in theory, if you put enough pressure on, it could break the end of the cable. So what I've done, I've welded an 8mm nut on the side of the throttle pedal and put a little bolt with a rubber cap on the end, just so that's then adjustable. It's also got a locking nut, so you can set the throttle perfectly. So I've done it so there's just a little bit of slack still in the cable. And obviously this is a Nova cable that's been modified. It does have a spring in the end, so you do have that bit of security measure as well. But yeah, that should stop the cable from breaking or the end coming off or anything like that. It'll hopefully prevent any unnecessary breakdowns or anything like that too, and just make the car that bit more reliable. And the third and final job is to fit these side skirts. Now these are genuine GSI side skirts. It's also got the matching clips, the brand new clips, and the matching genuine rivets. So I'm going to show you guys exactly how to fit these, and that will be the final job on this Nova. Now when it goes away, it's going to be going to Bog Brothers. It's going to be getting mapped properly, settled properly, because at the minute it's running a bit rich. And if I'm honest, I don't really want to drive it because it's not running quite right. It's okay, but we want it to be bang on, get it tuned up perfectly before we show you any proper videos of it driving. It's also going to get all the GSI vinyls fitted and the bumpers painted white. So when it's done, it's going to be basically a really nice GSI rep with a very competitive engine. So, fitting the skirts. I haven't done this for about maybe 13 years or so. However, from memory, it's not that bad. So obviously they should fit like that, a little gap across the top of the sill. You've got these clips which go into the sills. And basically what you need to do, they go on here. The clips need to line up with the bottom edge of the sill like so. So just like that, and then rivet on. Obviously you need to get the spacing bang on, but if you get them lined up there, they're going to fit perfectly. Now you can put additional screws in the bottom here. I'm probably just going to put a couple in. If you put all of them in, obviously you've got more chance of water ingressing the sills, more likely to rot out. Don't really need it. Mine never had any, never had a problem. So yeah, we'll just put maybe a couple of screws just in case, and then we'll mark these and put these in the right place. So I've got a tape measure and a Sharpie. I'm going to measure the gap on the mounts, on the skirts, transfer it to the sill, and then I know they're in the right place basically, and I can start fitting them. I actually found it easy just to lay the skirt next to the sill and then mark the centre points for each mount. So as you can see, that is the centre line of the bracket on the skirt. And I want to get that clip in the centre of that. Now you do have adjustment in these, the actual bracket's bigger than the clip. So if you don't get it bang on in the middle, it doesn't matter. But I've eyeballed it and that looks pretty spot on. So now I need to drill the sills, put the rivets in, and then these slide over the rivet. So a special type of rivet, and this just basically locks on, slides over like so. And here's the rivet in question. And these are the proper rivets. You can use normal rivets if I'm honest, but these are the proper ones. So that the idea is that slides over that like so. So I line the clip up with the centre line and then mark the holes with a Sharpie. I then drilled the holes with a 2.5mm drill bit and did the riveting as I went along. This did take a while, but it wasn't too bad to do. You just got to be careful. Now, if you haven't got a steady hand, I would recommend using a centre punch just to centre the hole, and that'll make it much easier for the drill to start. Right, so now the rivets are in, clips are on, it's now time to put this fin on. So I put a bit of double-sided tape on the back. This essentially needs to slide onto the clip, which is a little bit awkward, and then push into place. Something like that. Double-sided tape just goes behind here. That's how they are factory. And I'm just going to put a couple of screws in the end here just to fasten it on. That is the rear fin fitted. I then remove the rear wheels so I can get better access to the inside of the side skirt. So I can drill the holes and put some self-tappers in. Now the self-tappers were silver and I didn't like that. So I apply coated grit primer followed by some X primer and finish with some factory style bumper colour paint. This is U-Pole dark grey and it's very, very close to the original.
and then screw them in, and I think it looks a lot better than just normal silver screws on show. And I think things like this just finish the job off very nicely. I then just push on the long bit of skirt. Now this literally just clips into place and knocks on with a little bit of pressure. So there we go, that's one side done. Now I can't quite clip this corner on just because the lift pad is in the way. Once that's down on the floor, I'll obviously reposition that pad and then fit on. And then I'll probably put, just like I say, put a couple of screws in this, but that is one side basically done. I'm going to drop it down and move on to the next side. Now I've said this before and I'm probably going to say it again, but this lift has made my job so much easier and I'm so grateful for having it. That's one side completely done now. I'm going to do the other side off camera because I don't think you guys really want to see that or need to see that. It's exactly the same process. Pretty simple, like I said. But I just wanted to say, don't the skirts make the car? I absolutely think they look stunning. I've always thought white GSIs look amazing. So once this is done and the full rep, yeah, it's going to look absolutely fantastic. Being such a clean car. I think Carl's going to be very happy with it. And I'm looking forward to seeing his face when he picks the car up. Oh, that's fun. Now it's back to Carl to get it tuned up on the rolling road. So I've been doing this YouTube live for a couple of years now and I absolutely love it. And I really appreciate the support you guys give me. So what I've done, I've made some other social media platforms for you guys to follow me on. And you'll see a few behind the scenes shots, things like that, just other things that might interest you. So if you're interested in them, go and give them a follow and comment on my last video or post or whatever. Just write on YouTube so I know where you've come from. And obviously if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel. Thanks guys. Now sadly I couldn't be there on the day of the rolling roads. So Carl sent me these videos. The tuner balanced the bodies and set everything up, including refining the cam timing. It was then ready for a couple of power runs. Now turn your speakers up guys and enjoy. So the car made 208 horsepower at 7,200 RPM and I was absolutely thrilled with that. Now for the bombshell. So Carl sent me this message a few weeks after setting the car up. So that's right, he's done 60 miles in the car and it's not quick enough, he wants to go turbo. So in the next year or so, he's going to bring it back and we're going to do a 300 to 400 horsepower build on it and go to town once again. So I think on that bombshell, we're going to end the video and end the series. So please look at the playlist, watch all the videos in full if you've enjoyed this video and you've not seen the rest. Also, if you haven't already, please follow my other platforms and subscribe to this channel, like the video and leave a comment below. Makes a massive difference. See you later guys and stay tuned for more. Bye bye.